Jason White, the new Speaker of the Mississippi House of Representatives. How you doing this morning?
Good, Lucien. Good to be with you.
You getting settled in as Speaker?
Well, I don't know if settled in would be a fair statement. We're figuring it out.
Well, I was pleased to watch that election take place. I imagine, I know even though the outcome should be preordained, it's got to still be a little bit nerve-wracking when you go through the process.
It is nerve-wracking, and it's it's exciting and it's cool, and you're there with your colleagues, and it's lots of emotion, and it's just a neat experience. Folks that hadn't seen the inner workings of the House and how all that stuff works. All of our statewides that we'll swear in this afternoon in the House chamber, they've known since November, and while we've been working toward this and trying to corral votes and get to this spot, you still don't know till that day,
right?
As you allude to. So it was exciting for that, but a little bit anxious. And,
of course.
Some of my to-be staff at the time that I hoped to bring on as staff were like, now, how does this temporary speaker business
I guess, are they working for free during that time period?
They kind of are. But when we elected that temporary speaker, Trey Lamar, whom I nominated for that spot, they were like, no, what if he didn't give the gavel up?
I remember, this is obviously a much smaller election, but when I was elected chairman of the party, I'd talked to every member of the committee, should have had all the votes. We put together a script, and I asked the general counsel to review it of who was going to make the motion and who was going to speak, and he said, well, this is great, but this only works if everybody follows it.
That's exactly right.
So I know that feeling where you're going, it ought to go fine,
that's right.
But it ain't over until that gavel falls and somebody declares the motion elected. Well, congratulations. I know that's a great honor, and I'm confident you'll do a great job as Speaker. You're only, as you know, the second Republican Speaker in the modern era.
Yes, sir. And like I told our group when I was addressing the entire body, but I stopped for a minute to speak specifically to our caucus. I'm like, look, we're almost 2/3 now, 79 Republicans out of 122, and though one of our statewide newspapers interpreted my remarks different on that particular issue, my point was we have 79 votes. That's almost a straight 2/3, and with 2/3, you can turn the lights out in the Capitol and just leave if you want to.
Yeah,
it's us, and so there's no excuses. Whatever we do or don't do, you can't point your finger across the aisle, or you can't blame it on anybody else. It's on us. So with that, Mississippi voters sent a very conservative legislature, and specifically a very conservative Mississippi House of Representatives, to work this year and for the next 4 years, and so. To whom much is given, a whole bunch is expected.
I think that's exactly the right attitude, because, for the longest time, you remember this, when Philip Gunn was initially elected, it was a razor-thin majority. You had Republicans who sometimes defected. We had a lot of then Democrats who, came over to the Republican Party.
Sure.
Some of them ended up in leadership.
They did.
But, it wasn't like it is now, where we've got 2/3 control. We can't say anymore, well, this didn't happen because the Democrats
right.
wouldn't agree. This didn't happen because we had to fight. I mean, we've got the votes.
Now, I don't want it to be that way. I want to try to find a way for us to find common ground on these big issues that I want to work on. I want the Democrats to be a part of that. I don't want this to be a kicking and screaming kind of thing to get there, because our problems, the ones that we still want to work on, I think are big enough that everybody has a seat at the table, and let's try to figure it out what's best for Mississippi, for all her people.
Well, that's one of the things I think the legislature does well. We were talking to Senator Andy Berry in the last segment that, unlike Congress, even though we often disagree with each other on what the right thing to do is, for the most part, y'all have got great personal relationships across the aisle, and I think it makes it, for the most part, less acrimonious than it might be.
It does. And another thing I'll say, just to give you an example, some of my Democratic friends were asking me if I would be willing to let their Democratic caucus chairman appoint some of the, maybe the kind of the way Congress does it and the way the U.S. House of Representatives does it, where they appoint a ranking member of whatever the minority party is, that sort of thing. You know how they do that. And I said, I don't want us to do anything like they do in D.C.
Yeah.
I want us to be able to talk, and those relationships. I heard you and Andy talking specifically about relationships. It's hard to be really mad at somebody if you know them. You know what I'm saying? It's easy to hate and not like what you don't know. So we're going to take some time, especially in January, to try to try to promote harmony and getting to know each other. We have 25 new members in the House.
Goodness.
So,
do you know how many Republicans, how many Democrats? Is it a mix?
It's 70 of the 25.
Of the 25.
It's 17 new Republicans and 8 freshman Democrats.
Wow.
And of course, that means we have 41 Democrats, 79 Republicans, and 2 independents. It's the makeup of the House.
I guess that's the point. I guess that's why the folks who wrote our Constitution made this a 120-day session, so there's kind of a month for y'all to get to know the new ones, let the new ones figure out how things work, and let these ideas kind of percolate.
It is. I've heard lots of ambitious people saying, "Oh, well, we can shorten the session. We don't need those 120 days. We can shorten it down." We might could a little bit, but there is some wisdom in letting those folks and letting a new speaker and folks that are going to be in new roles figure out those new roles and what works, what doesn't work, and they've got a lot to learn. We did have a good freshman orientation where we brought in different speakers and spent the whole day just with them down in room 113, and it was pretty neat to for the first time they're like, oh, that's how that works. That's how that, because you have no idea. Senior members yesterday were adjourning in memory of constituents who had died. It slows down as the year goes because it's only ones that have happened that week, but you have a lot from when we were out of session until now, and so several senior members at the end of the day were adjourning in memory of constituents who had passed away. The freshmen were like, what's going on? What's going on? What are they doing? So it's just another thing you don't even think about that they're like, oh, I need to do that. I need to, so anyway, just one little, some would say a minor thing that's a big deal to constituents.
Absolutely. No, I think that matters a lot to people. But you're right, too. You run for office and you have these ideas you want to implement, but unless you've been around the Capitol a whole lot, you don't necessarily really understand how a bill goes from an idea all the way to the governor's desk, really practically. You understand it kind of at a high level, but the real nitty-gritty.
Yeah. And something we take for granted, we have a staff of lawyers that work to help us draft bills and legislation and budgets and all that stuff. But they're termed the Legislative Services Office. And a guy asked me yesterday, he goes, where are the lawyers? I said, that's the Legislative Service. You mean you didn't know that? Yeah.
No, there's a lot to learn. Well, with us is Jason White, the new Speaker of the House. Stick with us for more with him. This is Lucien Smith in for Paul Gallo here on the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk EIC. Well, still with us here in the studio is Speaker Jason White. Thanks again, Speaker, for being with us. It's your first session as Speaker. You've obviously been in the leadership for some time now, but I feel like these first sessions after elections tend to be the years where there are both big policy wins and big fights. I mean, what is going to be your focus as Speaker this session as sort of the major issues you want to see happen?
Well, some of them may take more than a session. I would love to get some of these out of the way this session so that it doesn't linger and dominate the whole 4-year term, but sometimes it takes that on big issues. And plus we're fresh off an election, and so everybody there on both sides of the aisle it is fresh in their memory what their constituents were talking to them about. And it was interesting for me as we travel the state this election cycle trying to help some of my House colleagues get reelected or get elected in the case of our freshmen, just to hear them talk about, the candidates talk about the different issues that were so important to their constituents as they were going door to door or going to the political rallies where we speak, and the barbecues and the soup cookings and all that. What's important in DeSoto County might be totally different than what's important, somewhere in the Pine Belt, and then you have the coast or in Meridian, like all these different places, Vicksburg. They've got cool things going on for our state economically and in their communities. But even though we're a small state and less than 3 million people, the varied interest that we have, and then you put the Delta and the agriculture of that in it. It's just unique how all of that stuff comes together and all of that stuff converges on the cap. When we get here to session, everybody comes with those things that they've just heard from their constituents. And so the things they kept hearing about on doorsteps when they were knocking on doors were things like the ballot initiative. There was beginning to be conversation about PERS because they remembered the headlines and the little bit of a disagreement about what the PERS board was going to do as far as the employer's contribution, which for me that's the state, whether it's the form of school districts or IHL or all the different facets of state government. So those are two issues, especially the PERS issue. It's not a sexy topic. People weren't campaigning on that issue.
Right.
You know, we had a statewide governor's campaign, and both candidates, for the most part, you didn't hear much of anything.
Well, I mean, a lot of people, understandably, it's sort of the third rail of state politics.
It's the third rail.
You get too close to it, you die. I mean,
Right.
do you think there's a realistic solution to PERS? I mean, we've got a dramatic underfunding problem, obviously.
We've got to find one. We're now under 50% funded, and I know nobody's, you know, saying that everybody's going to retire tomorrow, which would, that's where that number comes from, is that everybody retired, where's your funding? You understand how that works. But there's 114,000, give or take, retirees. There's about 25,000, something like that, state employees. So between the retirees and employees, you're talking about 250,000 people who have a real vested interest in what's going on with that plan. And they are politically plugged in. They know their representative and senators' phone numbers, those kind of things. They're very actively engaged in the political process. And so that makes legislators apprehensive to get over in that space. But when it gets to this point, I don't have the solution at this point. But what I think we need to educate everybody about is the fact that there is a problem there. And we've kicked the can, and we've kicked the can, and we've kicked the can. Look, my wife's a state retiree. My parents are state retirees. I have a personal vested interest in seeing that this thing is sustainable, it's viable long term, and
nobody's
it's good.
talking about taking away from the promises that have already been made to retirees.
Absolutely not.
That's the part that I think gets missed in these discussions.
It's not about that, but it is about being sure that long term we're in a good place with that system. I mean, it's an economic driver in our state. I mean, the spending power that, you know, they pay out $3 billion a year.
Yeah, and that gets spent for the most part in the state.
That's exactly right with our retirees. So we're going to have real conversations about it. We're going to put some of our smartest people on it. And one of the committees that a new committee we're going to have is called a Committee on State Affairs. It'll be a fairly small committee, probably 12, no more than 15, but probably only 12 House members. And we're going to focus on a few big issues in that committee, and it'll probably have a breakdown of our Republicans and Democrats about like our percentages of the total, probably 7 or 8 Republicans and 4 or 5 Democrats, senior members, and I want those people to be involved in weighty things like this that affect every Mississippian and are such an important issue for our people.
On the education front, I mean, my sense is, obviously, Mississippi's educational system, I think, is in the best shape that it's ever been. Not to say there isn't massive improvement that we'd still like to see happen, but it's a direct result of Republican leadership in that 2013 Education Works bill. My sense is there's going to be another big push this year on education, both to change the formula and to give parents more choice in where their children go. On that first issue, I mean, I saw a headline that said you were talking about the formula. I mean, you think we got a chance at redoing the formula?
We're going to do it in the House.
Okay.
We've as you may remember, we passed it several years ago, and it went down to the Senate, and it failed by just 2 or 3 votes. We think that formula, that Ed Bill formula that we worked through that time, and I say we, it really wasn't me, but it was some smart folks, Chairman Richard Bennett, some others that really engaged on that education committee and worked hard on putting together that formula rewrite. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're going to start from that and work off of that. But we want that formula and the accountability model to reflect the priorities of the legislature and of the state. We're spending a lot of money in education now. We're
more than ever, I think.
More than ever. We're paying our teachers better than ever. And by things that are measured nationally, we're actually not rating last. In some places we're middle of the pack compared to our other 50 states. So lots of hard work, and it was Republican hard work, and we took a beating for some of the things we did.
Oh, absolutely.
And you were there. You were with the governor, and you remember those days. We were some bad people for moving the pieces around on the table,
absolutely.
if you will.
Yeah, I remember Hank Bounds telling me that agenda was going to hurt children, which just amazes me looking at the numbers now.
And here we are. We have stuff to measure. We have stats to measure 10 years later, and it's been terrific for our kids and for our school systems. So we want to prioritize. You mentioned something about school choice. There are two things in school choice for us. Yes, we want to give parents an option if they are in a school district or in a situation where they don't feel that fits their child. But the other choice we're talking about is within that school district, we want them to be able to choose an alternative curriculum track. If they know their child is not going to a four-year university and they want to go into a career tech track, we want them to be able to do that, not when they graduate and end up, going to one of our four-year universities and figuring out this isn't for me and come back. We do a great job of graduating college prep. 93% of our graduates are college prep ready when they graduate. The problem is only about a third of them go to a four-year university.
Interesting.
And then about only half of those actually graduate. So, again, other states are doing this. We don't have to look far. We can look around at some of our sister states and see how they're doing it. We need to stress that and give parents that option. And certainly in school districts where that's not available, where those alternative career tracks aren't, curriculum tracks aren't available, we want them to be able to find a school district that is. But the other piece for us is we're not going to force any school district, public or private, to take any kid. The receiving school would always have to agree to accept on an individual, one-by-one basis. What we don't want are school districts not releasing kids to go to another school district.
And we're only current law requires both school districts.
That's correct.
Right.
It requires a school board, a school district where that child is, per their zip code. That board has to vote they have to release that child, and thereby the money, if you will. And we're only talking about the state share of the per student cost. We're not talking about any local money moving around anywhere else. We're simply talking about the state cost.
What about on the private school side? I know there's been talk of expanding our educational savings account program to allow public school students for that money to follow them over to a private or independent school.
We're working on that. We had a little setback last week when the Mississippi Association of Independent Schools came to sit down with us and inform us that they were not in favor of any school choice coming out of the legislature. So that was a little bit of a setback for us. So,
I think that's stupid. I think MAIS is working against the interest of its members if it's doing that.
I wondered where that vote came from or who was that. But maybe our public schools, maybe our private schools don't want it. Our parents want choices.
Absolutely.
They want choices. And hey, I reminded our folks yesterday, they're the ones paying the taxes.
Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is, and we've talked about this before, rich people have school choice right now. The legislature can't stop school choice for rich folks, but they can give it to folks who don't have those sorts of means. So you can stick with us for one more segment.
Yes, sir.
Y'all, we've got Speaker Jason White with us here. This is Lucien Smith on the Paul Gallo Show on SuperTalk. Coming to you from the Mississippi Trade Mart, where the Mississippi Economic Council is hosting its annual Capital Day. And with us in the studio is still Speaker Jason White. Well, I hope y'all will be successful in seeing meaningful school choice. It would be an awful shame for us to have neighbors like Arkansas who are making these big changes and then have us kind of do these little incremental changes. Because going back to the 13 effort, there was a push from the education establishment. Let's do a little bit. Let's not do these big changes you want. And if we'd done that, we'd still be the bottom everywhere. Not to say there's not an opportunity for change. So I appreciate all y'all are doing there.
We're going to push hard on that and work hard on it and try to bring people together on the issue. And I asked our state superintendent, we have a new one. He brings fresh ideas. He comes from Corinth, from what I would call a more rural school district compared to some other places. And so I think he gets Mississippi and our public education. So we're excited about him being there, getting confirmed by the Senate and getting to work. Him and our superintendents all around the state, we want them to be a part of figuring that out. We want them to be at the table and help us craft that moving forward.
And they should be. But I'll say again, shame on MAIS for opposing that. I mean, I'm a supporter of independent schools, and I think that's just absolutely shameful that you'd pull the ladder up on other folks and just support the people you got now in your schools. Well, not asking you to endorse that, but that's just Lucien Smith talking.
Those folks are
shameful.
Those folks are certainly my friends, and I think they put a great product on the field. I just would like to see more of our Mississippians You and I have school choice, and I would like to see more of our Mississippians have that choice. To me, it's not that outlandish of an idea.
I agree. I agree.
And you know,
we're also not the first. We're not the first state coming up with this idea.
Right.
I mean,
let me say this too: as studying this school choice, the take rates in most states are less than 10%. People prefer their local public school. That's where they went to school. That's where they'd like their kids to go. There's a sense of community around it. This is not an attempt to dismantle that. In fact, we think it actually bolsters it. And there are some statistics that prove that it does, because folks up their game when parents, if they don't like the product that's being put on the field, so to speak, they can pick up and go somewhere else.
Which is what happens in every other sector of the economy. You got one grocery store in town, a second one opens up. You're either going to have a new one grocery store in town, or the other one's going to get better. And that's the nature of competition. Let me shift for a second to healthcare, because we've only got about 3 minutes left, and I know healthcare is going to be a major focus of this session. You were, and I don't know how fairly framed it was, but there was a headline a while back that essentially said Jason White is a, maybe not supporter, but open to Medicaid expansion in Mississippi. So where are you on expansion in particular?
I talked to our body about that yesterday when I was had the opportunity to address them as a whole for the first time. I think we need to really look at it. It's been the law of the land now for 12 years. It's with us. There was even a couple of years where Republicans held the House, Senate, and the White House in Washington, and those laws were not repealed.
Right.
They're still the law of the land. 40 states have done it now. Another 2 are looking at it. We need to figure out what is best for our state. And I'm not one of these we already have about 700,000 Mississippians on Medicaid, so I get it. It is a significant portion of our population, about a fourth. You go to adding a few 100,000, now you're 1 in 3. So we've got to be real careful about what we can afford. I want these folks that are fixing to blow all up in this building with MEC, we want Mississippi businesses to be part of this conversation and part of this solution as we figure out what that expansion population looks like. These are working people. They're an important segment of our workers in Mississippi.
And I think that's an important point. These are people who are out there. They are working every day. They just don't have full-time help.
For me, it's the most important part. And I said this to our folks yesterday. I want to keep them in the workforce and out of emergency rooms. That's a bad place to get primary health care, is in an emergency room, because usually it's too late or the problem is exacerbated. So we're going to look at it, and I'm going to put some of our smartest people on that. And we've got smart folks over at Medicaid. Drew and his team are excellent. What they did for our hospitals with the enhanced reimbursement this fall was it was a godsend. That was a big deal for our hospitals. They're hurting. This could be a big deal for our working folks and our providers. And I'm going to bring all them in, along with Medicaid and along with Mississippi's business community. We're going to figure it out.
So I don't, at a remote, I don't have access to the C Spire text line, but I would be willing to bet you money there is more than one text right now that says, ask the speaker if they're bringing back the ballot initiative process this session. So
the House will move a bill pretty quick.
Okay.
Probably in just the next 2 or 3 weeks, you'll see the House move a bill. We intend to pass it and get that piece off the table, if you will.
We got about 20 seconds left, Speaker. Any final thoughts you want to share with the listening audience?
Your legislators are hard at work at the Capitol. We're hoping for no more bomb threats today.
Well, I'm rooting on you on that and rooting on you for a great session.
Speaker Gunn said I'll leave y'all for one day and chaos ensues. So, anyway.
Well, I appreciate you being with us for 3 segments here, Speaker. Good luck on a good day and a great legislative session, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Lucien. Good to be with you.
Y'all, this is Lucien Smith in for Paul Gallo here on the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Stick with us for more.